Hello and welcome back to the Diaries of Space Explorers. I am your host, Gavin Tolometti, and in this episode we speak to Dr. Parshati Patel, who got her PhD in Physics and Astronomy at the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She is an avid science communicator, the Education Outreach and Communication Specialist at the Institute for Earth and Space Exploration, and a talented astrophotographer. Without further ado, let's get right into the episode. I think since we're opening up the diaries for you, why don't we go back to the beginning? So what is it that brought Dr. Parshati Patel to space?
It's actually a very interesting story because when I was young, I was all about exploring. I had tons of different interests. I would like everything to do with books, like any books, history, geography. I remember having maps, and I remember having ancient history books and science books and math books. I always liked books, but I was never particularly interested in space. I don't think I had discovered what space was. I knew what's things in science, but I never knew about space until I visited a planetarium, and it was a chance visit too, because we went to Mumbai, which is one of the biggest cities in India, and for a touristy visit. And one of the things on what would you do as a tourist was you go to the planetarium. And so we went there and I saw everything around, and interestingly, I don't remember much of the show, what it was about. I do distinctly remember what happened right after. It was I had a lot of questions, and I asked my parents about it. My parents are I have no idea. They're not from space background. And so what they did was there is a bookstore, the gift shop, whatever, at the planetarium. And they're just go get some books, and hopefully those will answer your questions, And so I ended up buying a couple of books, and I remember one of them was about the Big Bang Theory, and I was I bought something that's way over my head, and I was only 11, 12 years old, so it wasn't that I had advanced understanding of physics or anything. But that started kind of my journey into what is this? What can we learn about the sky? And I did not know this existed. That's how I got curious about it, and then from there, it was just reading more books. And my aunt actually, when she came from Canada, she asked my mom what would Parshati like to have, and my mom was she's obsessed about something called space and stars and things like that. So just bring her a book and she'll be fine, about space. Instead, my aunt got me a very small telescope, but it was good enough to see all the planets and the moon. And so the moment I kind of, it took a lot of time to figure out how to, it was before YouTube days. It was before the internet era, right? And so I had to figure out how to set it up. But once I did, and when I saw the moon, with my eyes, I remember distinctly seeing Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn's ring just blew my mind. And I was oh my God, I wish I could do this for a living. And that's kind of where I really decided that this is what I want to study. And so, yeah, so that's how my entry to space world happened.
So it all started off just from curiosity and some space books that you came across, and just bugging your parents about finding more about what you could learn about space.
Yeah, it was really all about just asking. I just had a lot of questions, and I had no one who could answer my questions, and books were the only place I could find answers.
So if you could remember, what was the name of one of those books that you found?
It's interesting. A few years ago when I went back home, I was let me look through the piles and piles of books I used to have to figure out what that book is. I distinctly remember the cover of the book, and when you open it, it was all about this orange and black, Big Bang, kind of artisty version on it. I don't remember the name of the book, because by the time I went to find it, my mom had donated a lot of my books, and so I was not left with any space books. I had just other books. My mom was I don't know what to do with these other books. Space books, she donated it to the library and the community center and places where people would study more about space, because she realized that I might not enjoy these books anymore, but someone else might.
Okay, well, I mean, I feel that's how I think a lot of kids start to get inspired by space. They will come across a book And then we get to learn about all these cool things about black holes, stars, how the universe theoretically began, and at the same time, or they could maybe meet inspirational figures in their life or on TV. And so, as a kid, when you start to learn more about space, that you didn't really just stop there. You brought that with you to Canada, where you went to get your more schooling and eventually your PhD. So, what was it that brought you to Canada to pursue space in particular?
It's a very interesting thing because I grew up in India, and pure sciences aren't something your parents tell you to do in India. It's either like medicine or engineering, and I was very much told that after grade 12, oh, you have to go into engineering. Like that's really the only field, you should be studying. But I really wanted to study like the nitty gritty, like the physics and the math. Like I really enjoyed that. And interestingly, like I was scoring good in those then, biology, or like what normal people like, in India would go towards, like medicine and pharmacy. But I realized that I wasn't an A student. Like my grades weren't great, which meant that, there were only very few universities in India where you could do your master's or your PhD in astronomy or astrophysics. There weren't any schools at bachelor's level. So when I decided I wanted to study, I was like, you know what? I could start with physics, but I really do want to study astronomy because, yeah, there's a lot of physics used in astronomy, but it's a different field. It's a field where you apply all the physics you learn to everything that's in the night sky. And that wasn't happening in my bachelor's of physics. So I ended up, looking for places where I could go and do bachelor's, which is not very common. Most of the people come for master's or PhD I guess they move away after their bachelor's. But I decided to explore. First, I tried US. It did not work out in terms of visa. I didn't get it. So I was like, let's look at other countries. I was looking at Canada, Australia, Europe. And luckily, I got into University of Toronto here in Canada, and I got the visa, and here I am.
So what was it like? I mean, picking Toronto, I mean, it's just a really big institution. And was there something in particular that when you looked at Toronto, you thought, you know what, that's where I want to go. That's where I want to find more about space.
It's a very, very interesting question, and the reason for that is because it had nothing to do with program. I mean, I did not know anything about Canada at that time. I'd applied to 4 universities: Toronto, UBC, which is University of British Columbia, University of Victoria, and University of Western Ontario. And I got into all 4 programs. The reason I chose University of Toronto was because my mom was more comfortable me being in Toronto because we knew a few people who lived there, and she didn't want to send me off to like no place like no one knows, or like I wouldn't have anyone I know. And so that's why I actually choose University of Toronto to do my bachelor's. Obviously, when I came here, I realized, oh yeah, like where everything is. But when you're sitting in India, it's very hard to know anything about. And again, this was a very long time ago. I mean, there was internet, but back home, like we weren't really using it as much as we do now, right? So I didn't have a chance to get to know the country or anything like that before actually coming here.
So how did you find the transition from, I mean, I think moving from India to Canada, and I guess if you've never been to Canada before, it must have been quite a big transition to come get your bachelor's degree.
Yeah, I think I was, first of all, I was very young. So I'm glad I was young because there was a lot of things that I just took it as, oh, I have to do it. So, if I was a little bit older, I'm pretty sure like I would have cried like a million times being like, oh my God, this is so hard. But I don't remember during the 4 years being, oh my God, this is like a hard transition. I think one of the things that I did notice, and I often talk about, is the fact that, I studied in an English medium school back home in India, which means, my schooling was in English. But I lived in a place where, my mother tongue was Gujarati. A lot of people around me would speak Hindi, but my school was in English. So it was like a very multilingual kind of setting. When I moved here, I realized the accent is very different. People speak way faster than what they do back home in India. So my first entire year, I think, was very hard to sit through classes because I would hardly understand what they were saying. absolutely loved having the PowerPoints and, being able to read in the textbook because I understood that. But just listening to people and being part of the conversations was very hard for me. And it took me, I think, a couple of years before I got over the fact that, I would ever stand up and ask a question because I did not know if people would understand me. If I ask a question, like, do they understand my language? I think that was the biggest barrier in terms of transition, because it took me a couple of years to get over it. And I think the other thing was in terms of education, back home in India, education is very different than what we have here. We have, assignments where you're solving problems and you're doing things that are more practical, applicable things that you learn. Back home, it's a lot about memory. You memorize a lot of things and you write like these essay kind of questions. In physics, which like it didn't make sense to me at that time. The moment I came here, I realized that it was very different. And that was a little bit of transition because I had to switch my thinking on to be like, okay, I learned this law. Now, how do I apply it? Where does it, where the applications are? That was not something that I used to think when I was learning any kind of subjects back home. So that was a second transition, which I think I did okay, in terms of I passed all my courses and I was able to take like a wide variety of courses. So yeah.
So it sounds like it wasn't the easiest start, having to slowly get used to English, a very dense English-speaking country. But I'm hoping everyone was nice to you about it, trying to understand that, okay, she's trying to learn, so that's why
Yeah.
she's here. So we're not going to try and bombard her with a lot of, I guess, complex English words or try to speak fast, even though we know that she can't keep up with us, at least just not right now. So it's very cool that you managed to you worked your way to it, which is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, like you mentioned that, people would make this effort, but it was something that I wasn't upfront about it. Like I would just sit like back and listen, like I would never say anything because I was like, oh, like how would that impact the conversation if I asked them to slow down or if I asked them to just like modify the way they say things. So like I always just sat back and listened. And people might think that I was shy, which was totally not my personality. If you knew me back home and if you came here and got to me during my undergrad years, like I was a completely different person because I was just like so afraid to say anything or like be part of the conversation. There's also that aspect that when you move, back home, you're talking about things that are happening around you, the history and, things that when you come here, people are talking about all of these shows. Like, I did not know what Star Wars was, Star Trek was, like things like that. And I'm like, just
Oh,
sitting there
you
being
were
like,
new, so you were new to the Star Wars Star Trek game.
I was new to all, like 95% of the stuff was new to me. Right. So like I'm sitting here, people are having like these conversations about movies and shows, and like I'd never heard about those things. And like Netflix and stuff didn't exist at that time. So it wasn't like, oh, I could go and Google and catch up on what that was. So I think that it was a hard transition, but I think because I was so young, I did not take it as, oh my God, like, I'm in a different place. I was just like, oh, here's an opportunity to learn about what other people are talking about, though I didn't ask questions, I would just absorb everything around me.
Yeah, because a lot of the times when you hear people ask questions like, "Oh, what got you into space?" I hear a lot of them still say, like, "Oh, I watched Star Trek and Star Wars as a kid, and I found that so cool, so it got me very interested." So I think like you're just like that outlier where it wasn't those movies or any of those sci-fi TV shows that got you into it. It was a completely different path. So, which I
Yeah.
actually think is quite a good change sometimes, saying like, "Oh, I loved Star Trek, so now I'm studying spaceships," or "I love Star Wars, so now I'm studying lava flows on an active planet." So
Yeah, it was very different. And interestingly, since you mentioned Star Trek, I should say that I did not get introduced to Star Wars or Star Trek until after my PhD when I was running the first year of camp. And one of the students was like the students were talking about it amongst themselves. I'm like, oh, what is this Star Trek? And students were like, oh my God. You are a person who studies space. How do you not know this? Go tonight. It's on Netflix. Watch it. Come back. We'll discuss tomorrow. And that's literally how I got started into Star Trek. So it was actually the students and the kids who got me interested in it. But it is something that's very different. People have different, ways to get inspired to be part of space. And that's, I think, is very, very interesting.
Yeah, so you just mentioned a camp right there. So for all the listeners, what camp are you referring to about?
Yeah, so this is Space Explorers Camp, run right here in London, Ontario, at Western University's Institute for Earth and Space Exploration. I was, I guess, very lucky enough to be in the program at the Institute when I was getting my PhD, which is a collaborative specialization that you can do in planetary science and space exploration. So I was able to get that, and that gave me a lot of background in space exploration that I wouldn't have if I was just doing astronomy. And during that time, my master's and my PhD, I was doing a lot of outreach with the institute, which used to be a center back then. And in 2015, I started working on developing a camp, summer camp, after school programs, things like that, which is thriving now into a very, very big program.
Yeah, I mean, it's not often that you get to hear a lot of transition from someone starting in an academic field and then changing it to an outreach or even just an industrial-based career. So I guess I just wanted to quickly touch on is like, if academia at one point you thought maybe this isn't for me, what was it that suddenly made you realize outreach and science communication, that's actually what I want to do it to help space exploration?
Yeah, it was so like you mentioned, like I actually started my foray into outreach in undergrad. I was part of the student society, but I didn't really think about it much um as kind of, oh, it's a science communication kind of field, when we're a student society talking to students and other people. I think that was my one way of kind of getting to know people who like space and just making new friends and making that work. But my first introduction to actual science communication was through a podcast. The institute started a new podcast and they were looking for volunteers, and I volunteered, and I enjoyed it because I wasn't the face of the podcast. I was really doing editing and things like that. So I was like more on the back end. Again, I was very worried about my accent and whether people understand me, things like that. But they ended up hiring me as a teaching assistant because they realized that it was a lot more work than for someone volunteering to make a podcast, something that was airing on multiple stations and things like that. And with being a TA, I just didn't have to do podcasts. I had to go into schools to teach classes. My first class was grade 4. It was a girls group that I had to talk about Mars, and I was so terrified. But the moment it was over, I was like, I really enjoyed the thrill of like being able to answer questions of these young girls, and they were so excited, wanting to know all about Mars. And then throughout my master's, my PhD, I was able to gain the experience. So I had a lot of experience and really enjoyed doing it. People around me, realized that, oh, she's good at doing that. So it wasn't just the center. I was working at the observatory as well. And so I got a lot of different experiences during my master's. But in the last year of my PhD, like I was trying to figure out what to do. I did not want it to move because I was like, I've moved once from India to Canada. And if people know in academia, there's a lot of moving past your PhD, even, I mean, during grad school too, depending on where you're going, you may go do your postdoc at one place. You may have to do a second postdoc before you actually end up with, permanent, well, a semi-permanent position because, it's not tenure track. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to get into that rut because, I really wanted to settle down. I just like wanted to have a place of my own rather than, moving every 2 years. So I started thinking exactly a year before I was going to graduate that, what can I do? What do I really have in terms of skills to be able to find a job, basically, because I was an international student. So I cannot be in the country. I mean, I would get a work permit, but I needed a job to be able to, to survive here. And I discussed it with my advisory committee, which is one of the great things a PhD comes with, is these group of people who can advise you in different directions, and they know you well enough for so long that they know your strengths and your weaknesses. So I really put forward, some ideas to my supervisors. I said, well, I could go into industry, though I don't enjoy coding much. Maybe I will start enjoying once I have a job. And I said, well, the other thing is science communication, like outreach. I really enjoy it, but like, who would really pay me to do that? Right? That was one of my questions to my advisory committee. And they said, no, that's like, people work in museums, there are people who do outreach. So go look out for that kind of opportunity. And realistically, I literally emailed everyone I knew about it. And I said, hey, I'm graduating in April. This is May 1st. And so I have exactly 1 year. In the next year, if you know anything that's coming up that's remotely related to what I've done before, here is my resume, and just let me know. And luckily they were planning to hire someone at the institute to be doing outreach, and I was like, oh, I'll put my resume in the hat too. I mean, I've worked there for such a long time, I know everything in and out, like organizing. I know the teachers, the educators, we have worked with, the partners we have worked with. So I applied and I got the job, and that's where I am now.
I mean, like having to learning about your transition from academia to outreach, and from what I've read from your bio, that you have a very strong passion for outreach, and that you've started a lot of initiatives and projects from it, and it also looks like you've gotten to travel to so many conferences and events across not just Canada but also including the United States. And I remember when I was trying to look for outreach experience, like you probably saw me as this little grad student who didn't really know what he was talking about. So, and then you took me under going like, let's teach you the odds and ends and the how to effectively teach space to students from schools, high schools, and even people who have never really shown either much of an interest or a mild interest in space. So when you started getting into outreach, I know this might be a hard question to answer, but is there like one event or project that really stands out to you that really made you think like, I think I might be able to make a big difference with this happening?
Yeah, that's a very very hard question to answer, because I think um, it was a lot of things. Like you said, even during my PhD, I was doing a lot of different things. It wasn't just the outreach at the center. It wasn't just outreach at the observatory. I was also helping with the astronomy Olympics that was happening in the city. I was helping with the science fair. So from like different perspectives, I saw how everything I did, even if it was a class of 50 students, I think it had an impact on one person. I think that itself gave me that, ooh, this is worthwhile. I'm enjoying this. I seem to be doing it well. I seem to be improving it, which is, when I started, I was terrified of being in front of people, like what I said before with my accent and, not being from here. I always wondered if people would listen to me, things like that. And over time, I think the experience really helped me get over those things. And, so it was basically that entire experience that led me to it. I wouldn't say there was a one particular, I guess, event. I would say there was one particular moment when I thought that, oh, maybe I'm good at that, was when one of my current bosses, Dr. Yan Kemi, probably heard from someone else saying, oh, I enjoy being in classrooms and talking to kids. That was the first time he asked me if I want to work at the observatory. And I was like, oh, why me? And he's like, oh, I heard you really enjoy doing this and you're being good at this. And I'm like, I have no idea who told you that, but maybe I'm good at it because you're asking me to work at observatory, right? So I think that was one moment that I remember, distinctly thinking that, okay, maybe I can do this because someone thinks I can do this. And that was that was even before I started working at the observatory. And over different years, I've done different projects and, reached out to different kinds of people. And I realized the way you talk, the way you bring the topics is something that can change someone's perspective about everything around them. And I really enjoy that aspect, and I think it has all been from my experience.
I mean, getting to talk to all of these, not just kids, but I'm assuming a lot of adults as well. And they bring, if they come to you, they bring their enthusiasm or curiosity to learn more about space. But I'm guessing, because I know I have sometimes at outreach events, that you must sometimes get people that ask you the question, it's like, why should we care about space? So, like, why do we invest all these millions of dollars into missions and satellites that go into space? Like, how is that helping me in my everyday life? Like, why should I care that this is being launched? Do you get that quite often when you go to some of these events?
I think it's one of my top 5 questions that I get, other than always their life in universe or what are black holes.
Mm.
I think that's one of those top 5 questions that you always get is like, why are we spending so much money? What does space get you? And it's absolutely amazing. And I think I've done this everything in front of like a 4-year-old kid to like a 90-year-old person. Because I remember giving a talk at a retirement home to politicians. I have talked to our local representatives in the parliament, and one of the questions they asked was exactly that: why should my constituents care? Why should I be bringing this put forward to the parliament? Like, why should people care about this? And I'm like, well, realistically, if you have a phone, like the camera in your phone was thanks to space exploration. It's a spin-off, and a lot of people don't know about this. And the way to kind of get to someone's I guess not heart, but like in their brain, to appreciate the fact that what space exploration is doing is really talking to them about things that they use, things that matter to them, rather than what matters to you. I mean, I really wouldn't, if I was a 100-year-old person, I wouldn't really care about an iPhone, but I'm pretty sure like a 25-year-old really cares about the iPhone. So when they asked me that question, I said, every time you take a selfie, think about who actually came up with that tiny chip that you're using, right? So you have to change your tone. You have to think about their background and what they bring in order to be able to communicate that. And so this is definitely one of the top 5 questions I always get.
I'm just trying to picture that as like a slogan: selfies are possible because of space. That's like,
yeah, and there's so many other things like that too, right? It's not just that. Like, there's so many things, everything from like your lovely mattress that you sleep on right now, the foam mattress, to your paint chips. There are so many different things that are spin-offs that people don't even realize in their everyday life.
I think one of my favorite ones is like, it's a very basic one, but just like a general GPS. That if it wasn't for the satellites up in space, your phone, it would not be able to tell you. You wouldn't be able to use your phone to tell you exactly where you are, and it wouldn't be able to help you in your car if you're in an entirely new city or country and you need somewhere to navigate. And that's thanks to satellites constantly giving off your geographical position on Earth.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting, like, I guess a question that I've got right after when I've said something like that was, oh, well, that's like all engineering. Like, what you as a physicist do that affects, the GPS. And I'm like, well, you really have to understand the general theory of relativity and how like the how the planet dynamics work and all of those kinds of things to be able to even put things up in space, right? And people are like, oh yeah, I never thought about it that way. And yeah, there is a reason. It's just that you have to bring those things out to people in the way that it would make sense to them, right? And that's the beauty of science communication and education and outreach that I love.
Yeah, I think I get similar, like studying geology for my PhD, and so everyone thinks like, well, the engineers are building all the instruments. Do they really need you to look at the data? It's like, well, most of the time they'll build the instruments, but it usually takes a scientist including a physicist, astrophysicist, a geologist, to actually interpret the data, because that's what we're trained for. We look at the data and tell them what it's telling us, but they explain to us how this works. So it's a two-way street. Each person needs the other, and I think the industry needs both. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. They think space agency is just full of engineers, but it's like, yes, a good majority of them are engineers, but the engineers are only as good as and efficient as having the scientists, educators, science communicators, and administration with them. each person needs each other to help each other out.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of space that I love, that there are so many people from different fields that come together to be able to, to even like have a mission. There are artists, there are people who do communications, there are people who do videography, there are people who do science, engineers. There are so many different aspects of space that come together, and that makes it more interesting than any other field. At least that's what I think I'm biased, but still.
Yeah, we do. I think we do have a little bit of a biased opinion on it, but I mean, I do appreciate other fields as well. I mean, there are still, it's not just space that sometimes helps other fields. There are other fields that actually help space exploration, because we sometimes modify technology on Earth, and then vice versa. If we build something for an astronaut, we can then just modify it, and then it could be used for a company back on Earth. I think one that comes to mind is I think a version of what we use as the Fitbit now, like the very, very old first version, was just used to help astronauts, to monitor astronauts' vital signs during training. But then eventually it was adapted for recreational use. I think that's another favorite of mine.
Yeah, I also like the water filter, which just blows people's mind, because one of the other questions in the top 5, which generally comes from kids, because adults are generally like weirded out to ask about it, but is how do astronauts pee in space, right? So a lot of people don't realize how it's very heavy to carry water into space, so they have to figure out a way to filter whatever water was available on the space station to be able to make it drinkable for astronauts. And people here on Earth now use those kinds of water filter, like in places where you may not have clean drinking water, and so it blows people's mind, think like, oh, okay, it came from there. That particular spin-off technology was because people were trying to figure out a way to not have to send so much heavy water into space.
Yeah, I think it's just something like a lot of people don't realize, and it is like it's gross when you think about it, but you can understand why that they have to. You have to use all the resources available to you, which includes your own substance in that case. But when you realize that outreach was what you wanted to do as a career, what is it that, is there like a second goal, like career goal for you in mind, like with taking outreach to really be able to help the space industry?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I wouldn't really. I did not have anything as like a goal. Like realistically, like after PhD, I was like, I just want a job. And I really love doing science communication and outreach. What ended up happening was that, through the work that we've been doing at the Institute, there were a lot of opportunities to work with people from different areas. And I realized, oh, there are many more areas that require, science communication than just an academic institution, right? There are places, government institutions, there are industries, there are startups. All of them require those kinds of things, right? So I started, kind of looking into different aspects of how to communicate science in different settings, and who to communicate. There's a large target audience depending on who you're talking to, when, how, things like that. So that kind of became things that I was curious about and wanted to try out. It wasn't really goal of mine to actually look out and venture at other things. It just happened as something, as I was going through different projects and learning how to talk to different kinds of people, pitching things to different kinds of people. All of those things require communication skills, which again, when I was during my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, I never thought about it that way. I never thought about my presentation being, or like my pitch being, a thing that requires communication skills. I just thought, here is a presentation at a seminar every semester you have to do, or every a year, and you're like, yeah, I'll just put up things together and here is my presentation. No, there's a lot of things that go behind it that I did not realize until I actually started working in the field.
Oh, that's actually really, really cool. And there's one thing I want to quickly see about when you have go to all these outreach events, especially when one of the main goals of outreach in science communication is to not only try to explain to the general public about space exploration and STEM in general, but it's also to try and make strong connections between academia and the industry. Because now, the past, I'd say, decade in space exploration, it's becoming a lot stronger because a lot more of the private sector is now getting involved in missions, offering NASA and other space agencies space on rockets and landers that they're designing because they have a lot more freedom. And unfortunately, a larger budget to experiment with designs when NASA's usually just told you have this much. If it goes wrong, oh well. So which I think is really good. So, and with your involvement in outreach, have you ever gotten the opportunity to maybe talk with some of these industries in the space sector here in Canada?
Yeah, definitely. I attend conferences and I get to meet people from large variety of backgrounds. It includes people in academia, but also includes people in industry because, a lot of the conferences revolved around, okay, how are partnerships being formed? What are people doing? How can we partner with, industry, especially here in Canada? There is a huge, I guess, there's a huge market of startups. There are many more small companies doing space than there are bigger companies doing that. And so, when you go to conferences, you get to talk to these people, the CEOs and the founders, and what is really interesting is that these people know that they need to be connecting to different aspects of space, whether that's students or academics or communicators, and they make that effort. And so I have had a lot of opportunities to work with them, whether it's through different conferences or different projects. We have done projects with companies, but also with government. So I've been thankful in terms of having those opportunities right here in Canada.
Yeah, no, I think it's very cool to be able to learn more about what the private industry does versus what academia does, because there's a lot of projects that we sometimes don't realize are happening until they announce it. And it does show that we are seeing space exploration develop quite a bit. And we're also getting to learn more about how that technology can then be changed and modified to help people back on Earth, which I think is something that a lot of people always forget about, especially when it comes to the political side, trying to get your local representatives, regional, provincial, and if when in doubt, federal, to agree with your explanation.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about science communication is that once you know your target audience, there's so many things that you can bring in, and having that background in space and having worked as an academic, I guess I can say that given my PhD, knowing things that you have to go through, like the grants you have to write, and the collaborations you have to form, and all of those things come into play when you are talking to people in the government, or talking to people in the industry. Just knowing all those different aspects and how each of them work differently, I think is advantageous, just to be able to form partnerships and collaborations.
Yeah, I think when it comes to collaborations, that's going to be the most important thing to keep on advancing. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I actually wanted to move over to the question portion of the podcast now that I get asked all the guests. So I wanted to start with the first one. So if there's one celestial body that a future mission would go visit, which one would you pick?
Okay. Oh, wow. I mean, we've explored a lot of bodies in the solar system. So I think one of the ones that are least explored, and I guess generally neglected by people, are like Uranus and Neptune. And so I feel like it needs to be one of those two, just because I feel like we know so much more about other planets than we know about those two. That I think it would be really cool to be able to learn more about the moons of these two planets, and just about the planets themselves as well. So I hope there is a future mission to Uranus or Neptune.
Yeah, I think for me, definitely Uranus, because I still really want to learn more about why is it turning on its axis on its side. It's the only planet that does that in our solar system. And I know there are explanations for it, but I think until we actually send an orbiter to visit and monitor its magnetosphere, its gravity, we're not really going to know, like, why is it almost a 90-degree angle to every other planet? So it's
Yeah.
weird, fascinatingly, wonderfully weird.
That's like being a true scientist. You're like, oh, why is that? You just want to answer that question.
Exactly. It's like I can't take nothing for it. It's like, no, I need to know why. And guessing's nice, but I want to know the details and I want to see some data.
Yeah.
So the second question is, like, we've already touched on it already, but what would you say is your favorite spin-off technology?
It gotta be camera. Because I love astrophotography, and I love capturing the night sky. I love taking pictures. So, and especially having it in such a small, cell phone in such a small format, I think is very, very important, because I remember the days when I used to carry the heavy giant camera around, not having, cell phone with a camera. So I think my favorite is the camera, the CCD chip and the camera.
I mean, it's a piece of technology we use every day. I think it's a very good favorite one to have, because every time you take a picture, and you mentioned astronomy photography, and I know of anyone who follows you on Instagram, and anyone who doesn't, I highly recommend it, that she takes beautiful shots of the night sky. I mean, when we don't have overcast, of course. That's always a good limiting factor.
We live in Canada, so it's very hard to find clear skies with no one in the night sky to be able to do astrophotography.
Yeah, but I think we are in one of the few locations where if we just drive north, we can maybe get lucky and just get a glimpse of the aurora borealis. If we're lucky.
Yeah. I mean, I've lived in London for 10 years now, a little bit over 10 years, and I've only seen it once. So, but it does happen. And we're also lucky in a way that at least London, Ontario is closer to a lot of, I guess I would call them darker skies, not dark skies, but darker skies, that you're able to capture the galaxy and, look at the comet like we did in 2020. And so, we're luckier in that way. I don't have to travel like 2 hours away from Toronto to be able to do that.
Yeah, I always would say, like, I guess in Toronto, the amount of light pollution, you probably never get to see any of the night sky, even when they reduce the lighting in the city.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder. You have to drive away from the city, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And so the final question is, since this is the podcast for Diaries of Space Explorers, who is your favorite space explorer?
That's a great question. My favorite space explorer has to be hands down Kalpana Chawla. She was an American, I guess, Indo-American astronaut, and she was a big inspiration for me when I was, that teenager wanting to go into astronomy. And even though she was not studying really what I wanted to study, I think the fact that she was an Indian girl who went to America and, did her PhD and went on to become an astronaut, I think that gave me kind of the inspiration and the I would say the push to do what I wanted to do. And I think that was her. And so she's definitely my favorite space explorer.
No, I think that's a very good space explorer to have as your favorite, especially if it gave you such inspiration at a young age to get you to where you are now. So
yeah, and I mean, I have a second one too. He's close second, but
I mean, you could name drop a second one as well if you want.
I'm sure he knows because I've talked to him. That's Dr. Dave Williams. Like, that's one of the folks
I had a feeling it was going to be Dave Williams.
I know him personally, and absolutely enjoy every conversation we have had. And he knows Kalpana Chawla is my first. It's because we have had a conversation about it. And he's probably the most humble person I've ever met. And he's like not only an inspiration, but he actually pushes people to do things outside your comfort zone and try out different things. And so he's like my very close second.
But no, having two, even if one's a close second, I think is still very good.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, Parshati, I'd like to thank you for coming onto the podcast. It was very interesting to learn about your journey to space exploration and learning quite a few new facts about spin-off technology I hope the audience will take away from us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Congratulations on your podcast. I'm glad to be one of the early people, and I really wish you all the best with the podcast. I've been from the podcasting world, and that's where I started, and I really, really enjoyed the experience of doing it, and I hope you do too.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Diaries of Space Explorers. We have just been speaking with Dr. Parshati Patel. If you'd like to learn more about Parshti's work and maybe view some of her very, very beautiful space photography, you can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Parshati Patel. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast or would like to come on as a guest, you can find us on Twitter at Diaries of Space or on Instagram at the Diaries of Space Explorers. Thank you for listening. See you all next time.